Okay. Good morning, everyone. Just while everybody has a minute to log in, settle in, get comfortable, I'm gonna give everybody a few minutes and we'll get kicked off here in just a second. Hope everyone's enjoying the overcast day today. Give my weekly weather report as I do with every webinar. Just one more moment here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started so that we can kick off. So welcome once again to Orange County IDA's webinar series. Today's webinar is focused on procedures and requirements for reopening New York. I'm Laurie Villasuso, the CEO of the Orange County IDA. This today is the 7th in a series of webinars produced by the Orange County IDA to help Orange County businesses cope with COVID-19. We've covered a lot of different topics, including the Payroll Protection Program, the CARES Act, workforce issues, and planning for your company's future, but I'm especially pleased that we're offering today's seminar because we finally have a blueprint and a way forward to getting our economy up and running again. Before we move into this week's program, I want to let you know that next week's webinar on June 4th, 10 a.m. will be focused on what the banks want you to know about PPP loans and forgiveness. Our speaker next week will be Mike Wardowski, CEO and President of Wallkill Valley Federal Savings and Loan. The following week, June 11th, also at 10, our topic will be what we learned from phase 1 opening. Are we really back in business? And what actions do we need to take? Speakers for that session will be the economic development experts from the OCIDA and the Accelerator. We'll be sending registration information out by email, or you can check our website, ocnyida.com, for details. Today, though, our goal is to provide you with the information and tools that you'll need to complete the process of reopening. To that end, please remember that you can ask questions through the Q&A box on your screen. At the end of the presentation, we'll get to as many questions as we can today, and those that we can't address today, we'll follow up with after the webinar. Today's speaker is Peter Klein, CEO of Galileo Technology Group. Peter is a master's degree chemist, New York State licensed registered nurse, and has held executive position in nonprofit organizations, healthcare facilities, and for-profit high technology companies. Her starting point was medicine, but over time she transitioned into high technology. She has deep and diverse scientific experience base, which she applies to her work. She is well-versed in regulatory and compliance applications. Her excellent writing skills successfully acquired grant funding for numerous organizations. She is known in our region as a strong leader, caring and capable, having demonstrated success across multiple industry sectors. Peter was a co-founder of a nonprofit, the Solar Energy Consortium, where she, as an executive, managed over $9 million of federal and state grants. Peter is also a co-founder, incorporator, and managing partner of the Galileo Technology Group, a consulting firm that provides economic growth solutions to communities, such as business accelerators, as well as technical consulting services to manufacturing companies. She also happens to be a good friend of mine. We are pleased to welcome her as our newly anointed expert on the requirements companies need to meet and the procedures they need to follow to stay open and reopen in New York State. So Petra, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Laurie. That was quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to it. What we're going to do today is go over the safety blueprint for phase 1 industries reopening in New York State. And most of the information that you're going to see on this presentation comes from the New York Forward website. I'm going to be talking about some CDC guidelines, New York State guidelines, and so forth. And those guidelines can be found at the end of the presentation on some web links, and we can go over that. I'm going to go over the phase 1 industries, construction, forestry, manufacturing, retail, trade, and wholesale. Most of what has to be done is the same for all of them. Retail trade has some things that have to be that are a little different, and I have a couple of slides on that. But we're going to follow the template that New York State has provided. And at the end of the presentation, you should have a good idea of what your business needs to do to comply with the New York State requirements and to safely open your business. So the safety plan has 4 components, and each component has specifications for within it, like social distancing. In the process element, it has a screening that's required. I have to say that for essential businesses that have already been opened, you're probably doing 75% of this already. So you're well ahead. Those companies that are reopening now will have to take some lessons from those essential businesses. And I've got some best practices in the next coming slides in each of these categories. The process for screening and contact tracing, that's a new one that has been introduced in the safety plan. So we'll go over some of that as well. So with physical distancing in the template, it says that your company will agree to ensure the 6-foot distance unless the functions or safety requirements require that people are closer together. And if that's the case, then you have to have procedures and standards so that you can keep your employees safe. You need to put social distancing markers or signage throughout the facility in communal areas where people tend to congregate or may not keep that, that social distance. You really need to limit in-person gatherings as much as possible. Some of the best practices from essential businesses already up and running during this time has been to do a lot of telecommunicating and video conferencing. Another good practice and requirement is that you have contactless delivery and pickup as much as possible. And part of this would be to designate an area with either tape or signage in your facility or your business where that happens with pickup and delivery. So in order to meet this, you've got to ask yourself a couple of questions that apply to your business or apply it to your business. What are some common situations in your business that may not allow the 6-foot distancing between people? What measures are you going to implement to ensure safety of your employees in such situation, your employee visitors and clients? How will your business manage engagement with clients and visitors on these requirements? And how will you manage industry-specific social distancing? So a lot of these things you have to apply to your own business. And we can get in specifics a little bit later. But here's some things that essential businesses have already been doing and been successful. They've reduced employee density on site or on the job location. For those employees that can work at home and continue to be productive for the business, that should continue. You can alternate your work schedules. You have to avoid sending multiple crews or teams at the same area at the same time. So the whole idea is, how do you and your business reduce employee density? Where it's not possible, we get into partitioning and extra PPE. So the other thing these essential businesses have been doing is limiting non-essential visitors from coming on site or sending employees out on non-essential business or travel. These businesses don't allow a cold call visitor to show up. All visitors have to have pre-authorization before coming on site. If you're required to travel for your business, you want to determine the criticality of the visit or the travel. If it's required for continued operations or safety, then it has to be done. Something these businesses have also been doing is if they're sending people out into the field or to a facility, they're checking ahead of time in what COVID mitigation practices are already in place, so that the person they're sending doesn't come into an environment without protection. The other thing is what I had just mentioned is the designated pickup and delivery area. It allows for contactless pickup and delivery, and personnel that are delivering or picking up should wear PPE and perform hand hygiene and social distancing. In addition to physically moving people apart, you move the space, the workspace apart, and it just kind of goes without saying. But desks have been moved. If you've got two people in an office that, and you have the space, you separate them out. In some of the facilities I've been working with, their production cells have been grouped and separated to space everything out. You need to establish maximum occupancy for communal areas. If you have a conference room that holds 24 people, you might have a maximum capacity of 12 or 6, depending on the 6-foot distance you can achieve in that conference room. So you would post like you do in a restaurant, how many people are allowed at one time in these places, and that way you can maintain your social distancing. You can use tape on the floor, for example, put an X where the chair goes so that in a break room, that's where you're supposed to sit. So you know that. I know on the White House briefings on TV, you see that there's a sign on a chair, don't sit here. Those kind of things encourage the social distancing that's required. Now for occupancy in vehicles, company vehicles, you have to limit occupancy. If it's possible, an employee would come in a separate vehicle. If that's not possible, you need to limit the duration of the encounter. They have to wear face coverings, and you have to do frequent disinfecting of the vehicle. And the CDC and the EPA have guidelines for doing this, and that's on a link further on in the presentation. You are required by executive order or by mandate to give your employees PPE, appropriate face covering. They're supposed to wear the face covering when social distancing can't be maintained, and this is an executive order, whether you're in the workplace or not. Employers are required to provide these face coverings at no cost to their employees. And employees have to be trained on how to put them on properly, how to remove them safely, and how to clean the masks. So for example, when removing a cloth mask, if you're home or even if you're at work, you never remove it by pulling the front of it, because that's where, if there is contamination, it's on the front of the mask. So employers have to provide training to employees on proper use of the mask. Some employers mandate face covering at all time, even if you're further than 6 foot apart in a communal office, mandating face coverings, but the minimum is 6 feet apart. If you can't be 6 feet apart, then you have to wear face coverings. The next couple of slides have to do with retail and curbside pickup. And the requirements for this are a little bit different than the other industries in phase 1. I'm going to you'll have a copy of this presentation, so I'm not really going to go into detail about this. If there's specific questions in the end, I can get to that, but you'll have the slides. So the first thing we talked about were the people and social distancing. The second is the place. What are you going to do about your work environment? And one of the things is, I had just mentioned that employers must provide face coverings to their employees at no cost. Face coverings have to be cleaned and replaced if damaged or used. And really important, it kind of goes without saying, you can't share face coverings unless they've been cleaned beforehand. In the workplace, you also need to limit the sharing of objects and discourage touching of shared surfaces. If in contact with shared surfaces or high touch areas, you can wear gloves and sanitize and wash your hands after contact. There's a whole cleaning mechanism that is in this reopening safety plan that is a little more than businesses were doing before, I think. So we're going to get into the cleaning of that too. So you have to ask yourself for your business, what kind of face coverings and any other PPE are you going to require? And how are you going to get these supplies? Also, what policy or education are you providing to ensure that the PPE is, used appropriately and appropriately cleaned? You have to think in your business, which is different in every business, what are the common objects that are likely to be shared between employees? Like a conference room telephone, a laptop, tools on a production floor, those kind of things. So you need to make a list in your mind or in your business of what these are going to be, because you're going to have to address sanitizing them. And what measures are you going to implement to make sure of the safety of your employees when they use shared objects? So what some of the best practices from essential business who have already been open before phase one is when the mandate came down for wearing face masks, these employers provided washable cloth face masks. They provided training on how it doesn't help if you don't put it on and take it off properly, and allowed employees to wear their own masks. And there's been some real surge in creativity in the mask arena. And if I can digress for a moment, I saw a mask that had like a plastic window around the mouth for the deaf, because as you do sign language, the mouth is also looked, you look at the mouth to understand the communication, and it's been an impediment not to be able to see the mouth. But I just digress. But in any event, depending on your business, you may have to have different PPE. For most businesses, you'll probably need face shields and gloves, because you're going to have to screen employees and visitors before they come into the building. Sometimes to do the screening, you're closer than 6 feet. So this is something you have to keep in mind. Businesses have also limited of sharing of tool and established a clean mindset. I know in some facilities there are wash your hand posters everywhere, in the bathroom, in the break room, in the production floor, so that everybody is aware that they must constantly clean their hands and clean their work area. Something else that they've done is, if you've got production pods or you've got groups that are, because of the course of their work, they use common tools or they do common tasks, you can limit tools to that group. And what that does is it limits the number of people who actually touch it or share it. It's within that group. And that group has responsibility for cleaning the tools that are shared among them. Employees, so in every business, there's the employees have their equipment, and then it's kind of quote unquote their equipment. And there's also communal equipment. So laptops, assigned laptops, office phones and desks, tools, work areas. These are the companies, but because it's solely used by an employee, they have a responsibility for disinfecting their workspace and these these tools that they use. And the company has to provide the proper training on what disinfectants and what to clean. The business has communal equipment, like I mentioned, copiers, shared tools, instruments, and something that's done best practice is the last one out is the one that wipes it down. And the company provides the proper disinfecting agent in that area so that it's clean. So this level of disinfectant and cleaning is on an employee and a personal responsibility. The next section we're going to talk about is the cleaning and hygiene, which is a formal scheduled cleaning of the facility at every shift, not every shift, but at least once a day. So I'm going to get into that as we go on, but the hygiene and cleaning piece of this safety manual or this safety template says that your company will adhere to hygiene and sanitation requirements from the CDC, Department of Health, EPA, and those links are at the end of this presentation. Provide and maintain hygiene stations for personnel, things like Purell or any other sanitizer that's 60% alcohol or greater in areas where you can't wash your hands or it's further apart from restrooms, so you want to encourage hand washing. And this was what I was talking about, conduct the regular scheduled cleaning and disinfection at least every shift. It says at least every shift, daily or more frequently. So these are the questions you have to ask yourself about your business and how this pertains to your business or would roll out. So who would be responsible for maintaining a cleaning log because you have to document formally it was done? When I had mentioned what the employees are doing on their own, that doesn't have to be documented. That's just good practice. But this is a scheduled formal cleaning and has to be documented. We're going to keep the log. And where on the work site are you going to provide access to the sanitation stations or hand hygiene? I know in some of the facilities I've worked with, they've got Purell stations, entrances and exits, and almost like a fire extinguisher, you know, there's a sign above the fire extinguisher that points out, here's a Purell station. So it's highly visible and within walking distance, a few steps, you know, walking distance within the organization. How are you going to promote good hygiene, hand hygiene? We'll get into some best practices on that. And what policies will you implement to ensure that regular cleaning and disinfectant of shared objects and materials is going to be done? These products identified as effective against COVID-19 are also listed in the web links that I have for you at the end. So as with any cleaning solution or chemical, you'll have to provide employees with the SDS sheet. It's not only for their safety, but it's for proper use and storage. Also, the SDS sheets would list out additional PPE that would be required, or in the case of exposure, what to do as listed in the SDS sheet. The CDC and the Department of Health, also the EPA, have a guidance, and you should incorporate this guidance into your guidelines for disinfecting for your regimen. So you should prepare a list of suitable cleaning agents, and the list is in a link at the end of this, the very last slide. Establish a clean mindset with employees, provide training to all employees. Employees have a personal responsibility and accountability for their equipment, the quote unquote, their equipment and shared workspace. What's new in this phase 1 opening besides everything I've spoken about before, is that you have to develop a cleaning and disinfecting program and keep a schedule and log it. So as a business, you have to determine what has to be cleaned and disinfected and when. And it's those high risk, high touch communal objects, light switches, doorknobs, break room tables, all of that. But you have to see what are those high touch areas in your own facility. You've got to establish guidelines and procedures so that whoever is doing it does it the same way and does it correctly. And you should designate and train people so that it's done consistently. And of course, you have to document that it's done. And I had mentioned this before, just on a day-to-day basis, or whoever uses a communal room, the last one out wipes it down. It doesn't take the place of this scheduled cleaning, but it helps in the mindset that everybody takes care of each other with respect to keeping the place clean. Employees are encouraged to bring lunch from home. They should not share utensils, and businesses that have been open are not allowing a buffet or family style meal like a pizza. Alcohol-based sanitized stations should be installed throughout the facility. I just went over that. Someone needs to be assigned to check and refill them frequently. If you're going to wear gloves to clean and disinfect an area, you can't use the same glove to clean another area or another room. You have to discard them, wash your hands, and put on new gloves. This is also this is new in this phase 1 opening, is in the event that you have a suspect or confirmed COVID case, you have to do a decontamination of the area that employee was working in. So you've got to develop a decontamination protocol, and you have to do this before you need to do it. So the CDC guidelines are the affected area used by the employee should be closed off and open to the outside if there are doors or windows to increase circulation. They want you to wait 24 hours before cleaning. And if you can't wait 24 hours, wait as long as you can to clean the impacted area. And the reason for this is over time, the viral load on surface will diminish and the same thing with opening it outside to circulation. The virus is not that hardy on surfaces, and you can kill it pretty easily, but you don't want to walk in a room that is full of virus if you can wait for the load to decrease. And that's why there's the 24-hour wait. Clean all areas used by the employee. You're going to have to look at common areas, shared equipment. All of this has to be taken care of. And determine ahead of time, and this is something that may be recommended, is whether or not an external agency could do this for you. There are agencies that do this decontamination, and you may want to seek out, do some due diligence on vendors who could do this service for you. Communication is a big deal. I mean, everything that I've just said to you has to be somehow communicated and understood by employees. So your company would have to post signage throughout the facility to remind them to do all of the social distancing, the cleaning, and so forth. You should have a communication plan for employees, visitors, other people who come on site, and it's a consistent means to provide updated information. This is a new one too. Maintain a continuous log of every person, including employees and visitors, who may have close contact with other individuals at the work site. This excludes deliveries that are performed in the appropriate PPE, the contactless means, or through that designated area. So I'm going to get really specific about this log because this is a new thing in phase one. If this is also, I don't think this is new, but if an employee tests positive for COVID, the employer must immediately notify the state and local Department of Health and cooperate with the contact tracing efforts. And this is where the continuous log comes in, and work with the state. The other thing is you can't, in letting other people, employees know of a potential exposure, the confidentiality of the employee with tested positive or suspect can't be given out by state law. But you have the requirement that you have to tell employees that they were exposed. So you have to ask these questions for yourself. Which employee is going to be in charge of maintaining a log of each person that comes on the site, excluding customers and delivery that are wearing appropriate PPE? Now, customers in this case imply a brief encounter, a contactless encounter like curbside pickup. For customers in a manufacturing sector or others sectors where they're in a longer period of time or in more contact with employees, they have to be treated as visitors with respect to your safety plan. Where are you going to keep this log? And if the employee tests positive, who will contact in your business the department who's going to be responsible for contacting the Department of Health? So these communication has been done by essential businesses that have already been open. The daily screening and the reopening plan. And what we're going over right now is the reopening safety plan. So all employees have to be trained on what is expected with respect to COVID behavior, COVID mitigation behavior in the workplace. Even telecommuters need to be informed of this. At a minimum, employees should understand COVID-19 symptoms. They should know not to come to work if they are ill or symptomatic with employer notification. If the employer is notified, there's certain responsibilities they have to do, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Employees need to know about proper hand hygiene and sanitizing, need to know they're responsible for cleaning and disinfecting their workspace and equipment. Employees will also need to be trained on daily screenings. This is new. Employees and visitors coming to your work site will need to have a temperature and health questionnaire done before they can come on site, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Exposure monitoring is not new for businesses that have been open, and I'm going to get into detail about that. This is if an employee has knowingly been in contact with someone who is COVID positive or suspect to have COVID, but yet do not have symptoms. They're allowed to come to work, but you have to implement certain protocols, and I'll get into what those are. They have to be given instruction on face mask, PPE wearing properly, and the reopening plan, which if you follow this can be your reopening plan. They need to be provided this plan as well. You need signage for all of this stuff. And if you have social media or website, you can have a COVID link where you put all of this information so that employees and visitors and customers understand what you're doing and how you're complying with the phase one reopening. You should have a centralized location of all this material, including what you're doing as an employer to meet the requirements. You should post websites, the CDC, Department of Health, New York State website, as you do for your labor. You know, every HR department has a labor board. You can have a COVID board where information can go. Visitors and customers can be given a COVID mitigation practice flyer or handout, or given something to read, or it can be on social media. So this is what we expect you to comply with while you're on site. So the reopening safety plan required by New York State also includes an attestation from the business. So you click onto that link on the New York Forward site, and it's got the guidelines, and you read through the guidelines, and you come to the very end, and there's a link, and you click it, and you, as the business owner or someone authorized for the business, will attest that you will do all of these things and create a plan to keep your employees safe. The continuous log of employees and visitors at a business is a new thing in phase 1. So I would recommend review what systems you already have in place that might capture this information. The need for this log is so that if an employee or a visitor is COVID positive and there's tracing that has to be done, you're able to assist the New York State tracers in making sure everybody who was in contact with that person can be found and told and get the proper health care or testing. All businesses have to perform this daily health screening for anyone coming onto the premises. And you have to establish a procedure, process to follow in case an employee tests positive for COVID. If you don't have that in place, you kind of need these guidelines in place before you actually need it with an employee. The daily screening, this is a mandatory health screening that's done before an employee or visitor comes to work. And they're questioned about whether or not you've had any COVID symptoms in the past 14 days. Did you have a positive COVID test in the past 14 days? Were you in close contact with a confirmed case or a suspect case in the 14 days? Now, the reason it's 14 days is because you can be infected and be asymptomatic and spread. So they're looking back 14 days, and that's important. The assessment responses have to be reviewed every day and documented. And what you document is that a review was done, and you have to keep this information. The screening must have the name and date, and you can put that the review was done. The symptomology or temperatures cannot be recorded since that's privileged information. You can't put Peter Klein had a temperature of 100 on whatever today is, the 28th, 27th. So that's a privileged health information. Now, what's interesting is that some businesses are using the daily screen records for the tracing logs so that you don't have that continuous visitor employee log. If you have to check everybody that comes into your facility anyway and do this health screening, you've captured who's on site and when they're on site. So you have to ask yourself, for your business, what kind of screening practices are you going to implement? Will the screening be done before the employee gets to work or on site? You can do it over the phone. Who will be responsible for performing them, and how will they be trained? If screening is on site, what PPE is going to be required in the screening practice, and how are you going to supply this PPE? So this may be busy, but this algorithm is a sample screening algorithm, and it really outlines what you do. So I'm going to do a screening on you right now. So I take your temperature, and your temperature is not 99.6 or greater. So you get a no. So have you tested positive for COVID in the last 14 days? No. Do you have any one or combination of these during the last 14 days? You tell me, yes, I have a fever. Okay, that's a yes. Now I ask you, at least two of these, at least two or more of these. So you said you had a fever. Did you have chills, repeated chills, shaking with chills, muscle pain, headache, and then the new? So there's a yes here, but it's only one. Because you said yes here, you are not allowed to enter the facility because you have a fever. What the employer is responsible for is you, as an employee, would have to be advised to see your healthcare provider. The employer has to provide testing resources. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back one. You need to notify Orange County Department of Health of a suspect case. You can tell them the employee presented with a fever on this day, and they will tell you what to do or whether you need to follow up. You may, depending on which questions are answered, investigate when the employee worked last. So if you answer no, if you answer no to any of these questions, we go on to the exposure screening. So you answered no. Now, in the exposure screening, has there been a known close contact within the last 14 days with anyone who either tested positive or had COVID-19 or has any of those symptoms on the prior page? Let's say I say no, and I didn't have a fever or cough or any of that other stuff, then I can come into the facility. And I have to adhere to good hygiene, social distancing, wear a mask, and so forth. So that's good. No on the first, no on the second, I can come in. I say yes, but I didn't have any symptoms. If I had said yes on the prior screening, I would not have gone to even this screen because I couldn't get in. But I said, no, I don't have any symptoms. And yes, my neighbor, I went over to her house yesterday or a week ago, and then she ended up testing positive and I've been helping her. So I've had an exposure and I have to declare that to my employers. So I say yes. Visitors may not be allowed on site, and I'll say why in a minute. And you can decide as a business if that works for you. And a visitor won't be allowed on site, and they have to inform their employer that they have symptoms. And then their employer needs to follow the protocol in contacting the Department of Health, wherever the visitor is from. Employees may enter the facility, but they have to follow the COVID exposure monitoring program. And there's a procedure and COVID safety guidelines. So that has been in place for critical infrastructure workers for several months now. And what that means, and the CDC has guidance on this, and facilities have been doing this, even outside of healthcare facilities, is if an employee has a family member that's positive or a neighbor, or they answer yes to this screening and they do not have symptoms themselves, they have to follow a stricter monitoring program. And this has to be in place also for your business if you're letting an exposed person come in. So here's kind of what you have to do. So an employee who answers yes to an exposure may come to work if they don't have symptoms. They have to tell their employer when they become symptomatic. If they become symptomatic, even if they're at home, they have to notify their employer if they get a fever at home or coughing or chills. The employer must follow the CDC guidelines for exposure monitoring, and this is the guidance. A visitor who answers yes to an exposure confirmed case in the last 14 days, some businesses won't allow the visitor on site because the required follow-up and monitoring can't be guaranteed once the visitor leaves. If the visitor develops a fever at home, if the visitor gets a cough or tests positive, how can you be certain that, you know, the business would be notified or that you would be notified? If businesses are allowing visitors on site who have had an exposure without symptoms, they have to comply with the guidance. And visitors also are interviewed before arrival. And this is the guidance down here, and you'll have access to this presentation so you can link into it. But essentially, the employee's allowed to come to work. They get pre-screened, and they have to get pre-screened now anyway. They have to be regularly monitored, and they need to self-monitor as well. They need to be aware of what to look for and notify their employer if they develop symptoms. They have to wear a mask at all times, even if they're not 6 feet, even if they're further than 6 feet apart. The employee with the exposure should be separated from other employees as much as you can. And you really need to pay attention to cleaning and disinfecting of common areas and shared equipment. And the employee also needs to be mindful of cleaning their area as well. If an employee gets sick during the day, and he may not, this may not be an employee that told you they had an exposure. It's just, I have a fever, I don't feel well. If they get sick during the day, they have to be sent home immediately. They've got to be told to contact their healthcare provider. Testing resources have to be given to them. And if they get, if they test positive, you have to follow the protocol for the DOH notification, decontamination, and if an employee is not at work, but over a weekend or on a day off or in the evening or whenever, if they're not at work and they develop symptoms, they're required to notify their employer, and employees need to know that they have to do this. Contact tracing and disinfection is, you have to have a plan for this decontamination. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and contact tracing if you have a positive case. So you have to ask yourself in your business, in the case of an employee testing positive, how are you going to clean the applicable contaminated area? And we talked a little bit about that before. What products are effective against COVID? I have links to that at the end of this presentation. How are you going to get those products? In the case when an employee tests positive for COVID, how are you going to trace their close contacts in the workplace? How will you inform close contacts that they may have been exposed without, doing the confidentiality? And so we discussed this a little bit earlier. It's the same paragraph about decontamination, and it is a recommendation, if you like, to see if an external agency could help in this decontamination. Employees who are not in close contact with that employee can return to work, can return to that area after it's been cleaned. If more than 7 days have passed since the last time the suspect or confirmed employee visited or used the facility, then additional cleaning is not required. Employees need to identify people who are going to be responsible for the DOH notification and be of assistance to the contact tracers for their employees or visitors. Employees need to understand that they're responsible and required to contact their employer if they have a positive test, if they develop any of those symptoms, or This was a new one. Or those employees who've been alerted via tracing or tracking that they've had an exposure. They need to notify their employer. In the event of any positive COVID test of an employee, the employee must notify both, the employer, must notify both the Department of Health of Orange County and the New York State COVID hotline to tell them that there's an employee with a positive test result. In the event of any positive test result of an employee or a visitor, the employer must cooperate with the local health department to trace those contacts back and notify the DOH of any of all employees and visitors who entered the site dating back 48 hours before the employee developed the symptoms or tested positive, whichever is earlier. And that's why the Department of Health, New York State, are requiring this continuous log of visitors and employees so that you can go back easily and see who 48 hours before the employee got sick or tested positive was on site. The daily health screen records capture the date, they capture the name of the employees and visitors, and that a review was performed. And some businesses are using the health screening review record as your continuous log, so that you don't have 2 or 3 logs that you're keeping track of. So here's a sample log. Since you have to do, you're required to do a screening along with the names and dates of who came on site, this can serve as your daily log. So in this case, you've got the name of the employee, the date that they came, whether they were an employee or a visitor. You can't put the temperature in here, but you can say that it was done. You can put that the symptomology check and the exposure check was done, and whether or not they were allowed in the facility. I guess I wasn't allowed, but let's go to here. This is a visitor, and we did the screening on the visitor, and he was not allowed to come into the facility. There's no health information on this document, and they were told to inform their employer. In this case here, we have an employee, and he was not allowed into the facility, and the action taken was told to talk to healthcare provider, in addition to giving the testing resources, and the employer, if this employee had a fever or symptoms, then we would also do a 48-hour back look on who worked closely with that employee. And that's this section down here. Contact tracing will be required of contacts of these employees for 48 hours before the symptom or positive test, whichever is earlier. This is a very valuable web locations for most of the things I've been talking about. Cleaning solutions, how to clean, list of effective disinfectants, guidance. Here's the guidance on monitoring an employee who doesn't have symptoms but had an exposure, how to clean vehicles. This OSHA recommendation is very good as it reinforces everything you've been told here. Plus, you have to comply with these requirements. This essential business definition, New York State Forward, is a valuable site. And this is how you can use the template that's on the New York Forward site to write your program, your safety program. So these were the areas that we covered. These are the areas that you have to document how you're meeting the standards. And the safety plan template in the Forward site, a New York State Forward site, will help you with that. And I'm open now for any questions. I know this is a lot of information, and if you haven't been open already, it's a lot to take in. But the New York State the New York State Forward site really has it all laid out nicely. And you have to really think how to apply those requirements to the kind of business you do, and make sure that it's effective and that it's not burdensome.
Petra, that was fantastic. You're right. It is a lot of information, but it was really thorough. And I think it's so valuable to know. I mean, out there, it's very obviously overwhelming for businesses, but certainly, while New York Forward has a great website, it's also helpful to hear it from a person who's obviously studied it. So really, I'm grateful for that. We do have a few questions. So if you're ready, I'll start throwing them your way.
Sure.
The first one, which I think is a really great one, we actually, as we deal with a lot of people who are tenants, so we have a question that says, as a landlord of a building with multiple tenants, who is responsible for providing PPE to tenant visitors? And also, who is responsible for testing protocols and record keeping for the tenant employees and or visitors?
That's a good question. The safety plan in the forward says employers, and the landlord is not an employer. So doing an interpretation of what is written in the guidelines, it's the employer is responsible. However, you're responsible for the facility, which, it is a difficult, it's a difficult thing to answer.
Right. I'm sure more guidance would come out around that too, don't you think? Like where these things will start to emerge as reopening happens, where you can't really account for everything. So perhaps we'll hear more information.
But sure, if you're a landlord, a business landlord, you're responsible for your business and your business practices, and it's your facility. You're responsible for the hand hygiene, social distancing markers. In the tenant areas, they're responsible for what they're doing. But I believe it's the employer, but that doesn't let the landlord off the hook.
Right. It's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, I have to do a little research on that, but I think I'm going to go with the landlord has responsibility for the facility, and the tenants have responsibility for their employees and who comes in.
Right. Okay. As a phase one company, another question, as a phase one company, do I just need to go to the New York State website, the New York Forward, and find my template and fill it in and I'm ready to go? Is that what I need to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but what, you can fill it in. You have to, I would recommend if you haven't done this, to read the guidance for your industry. When you click into the Forward site and you go to your industry sector, construction or manufacturing, whatever it is, there are a couple of tabs, blue tabs. Actually, maybe I can show you.
So while you're looking for that, I'm just going to answer one that I can answer, which is it possible to have some of my staff listen to a recording of this session? Stephen, the answer to that is yes. The presentation itself, the full recording, will be available on our website, ocnyida.com. It will be available as the video and also as a PDF, so you can go through it at your leisure. Again, it's so much information that we absolutely expect that people will want to be following up on that. So we definitely will be able to have that.
So here's an example. Here's construction.
So I just, Petra, so we can only see still your PowerPoint screen.
What's that? Oh,
wait. See your PowerPoint.
Oh, I have to go to.
Yes, the sharing option.
Yeah. Still PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am.
Well,
I know it's clumsy.
yeah,
So
I don't know how to get it. I don't know how to get there. But let me just say that, for example, in construction, or any of the major industries, there are a couple of tabs, and one of the tabs is the guidelines, and it's like a 4-page cheat sheet. Here's what you got to do, and that I would recommend you print out, and that's your cheat sheet. The next one, tab, is 17 pages, I think. It's a little bit longer, and it lists in detail what you really need to have in place. So you should print that out. And then the last one is the template that you can fill in. And my PowerPoint is from that template. The questions that I ask you after each section come from that template to help businesses develop, to keep in mind. So you have to do social distancing. You have to keep people 6 feet apart. Your construction company, you got 2 guys in a truck, and you're going all these different places. How do you apply social distancing to your situation? So that's the hard part. Is it's pretty straightforward what you have to do. The hard part is, how do I make it work for my business?
Right.
If I can't social distance, then I have to do more PPE, or I have to do more hand hygiene. And I've also given you some examples of what businesses are doing now.
Right. And then once the template is completed, what do they do with it? Where does it go? Does it
Okay.
go for my own records, or?
So here's first. So there were the 3 tabs. One was like a little 4-page cheat sheet of what your business needs to do. The next tab was the 17-page thing with all the gory details. At the very end of that is a link that you have to click and say, I promise as a business owner, I'm going to do all this. That attestation goes, a record goes to New York State, that I, Peter Klein, for Galileo Technology Group, will abide by all of, to the best that I can, to these standards. The template becomes your safety plan, your COVID safety plan for your business. That doesn't go anywhere. That's in your business, and you need to make it available throughout your business, throughout your facility. And what happens if you don't have a safety plan is, if you have a COVID case, or if you have some reason that the Department of Health or OSHA or someone would be on site, they would look for this. They would look for these, policies and practices. And if in the absence of something like that, there may be fines or other problems for the company. So, it's your word that you're doing it, but.
So it's an internal document, just you would have it to refer to, or if
Well,
called upon.
you'd have to show it. OSHA would ask for it. The Department of Health would ask for it.
That makes sense. All right, so you just keep it on file. The next one is, we have a question about a salon, and actually one of the questions that I had too was, is there a way, in phase 2 and 3, spas and salons will start to open up? And Diane has a question about information on a salon and spa. Is there information about how many people per 1,000 feet, and can they take temperature of their clients?
So the salons, not nail salons, but hair salons, are limited open in phase 1. And that means they fall into the beauty products, or I don't know, I can't remember the retail. They fall under retail trade, which means curbside delivery. No touch, no care, no, it's just, if you have beauty products or shampoos, or something that you make as a beauty salon or hair salon, that you can sell curbside. You're not open for business. In phase two, it talks about professional services. And what I'm stammering because there isn't clear guidance yet on what's happening in phase 2 and 3. The governor said the other day, the standards haven't been written yet.
Okay.
So, I think they're waiting to see what happens with phase 1 reopening with this guidance before they go into phase 2, drafting documents. So it's not clear yet.
Okay,
And
so how many people per 1,000 feet or temperature of clients that will likely come out in the guidance for the next phase?
if hair salons are in phase 2, I don't know. I know in phase 4 it's restaurants and schools for reopening, but the guidance hasn't. You can't click in and get guidance on that yet.
Okay.
But I do want to say for hair salons or for any business, there is in the New York Forward a link where you can put your business NAICS code in, your NAICS code in, and it will pop up what you can do, what restrictions there are. If I could get into that, I don't know, I'm having trouble.
Yeah, the sharing is a little clunky, but
Okay.
we have and we can certainly post this meeting. We can get a few links together and we'll put them on the website in addition to this information, so that we'll have some click-throughs, and anybody who's looking for that information or those links we can provide.
Yeah.
So you don't have to beat yourself up trying to find it now.
Yeah, you know what I think. Go ahead.
Okay.
I think I might be able to get to it this way.
Okay. While you're doing that, I will say we have an interesting question, which is that, grocery stores and large box stores didn't seem to be subject to much of this stuff, and certainly the contract tracing screenings. One trip to the supermarket could negate everything that manufacturers and phase 1 businesses are being asked to do. Have you come across anything in your research that says why such different rules are applying for grocery stores? Is it just the essential nature of their service, or is it something else? Like why the difference in requirements?
No, I haven't come across anything specific. I'd have to look, and we could. I can do this after we're done. Is go into put the code in for grocery store, supermarket, retail store, and see what what restrictions there are. They've been, they've been considered essential. So that has made them like healthcare facilities and so forth, at higher risk because they're essential. And we know as the public that we take a risk going out. And so we do our due diligence with social distancing and hygiene and face masks. I know in the retail trade that the customer screening doesn't have to happen.
Okay.
And I'm not, I know that stores are doing different things like the plastic partitions. There is a mandate, which I do not see being followed in stores, about a 50% occupancy.
Right.
The places are crowded, and that's a problem.
Well, it's certainly also a balance between your business and your safety, right? Because some people are saying if I reduce my business by 50%, I might not survive. But that's another conversation for another time. We have a few more questions. Well, we have about 20 minutes left here. So I want to move on to this one. It's an interesting question. If you're from Kim, if you're a sole proprietor, you don't have any employees, do you need to complete these plans and track your own health, et cetera?
You do business with the public.
I would assume so, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
you would still have to?
yeah, it's tailored. The whole idea of the safety plan is to keep you, if you're the only employee, keep you safe and to be able to track back the contacts that you've had. And it doesn't have to be a full blown, like what the presentation was. It's that you do, you document you're doing the cleaning, you're doing that hygiene, you're wearing a face mask, you do social distancing. You may, depending on what business this is, keep a list of your customers. You don't have to do a full, you could go on the website, use the template and just say what you're doing. Social distancing. I'm always by myself in the car and I wear a face mask. And for hygiene, I have Perel sanitizers in every place, in the car or where I go, and I disinfect every night when I'm done working my work area. And I keep a list of my customers. You wouldn't have to screen them. I mean, if this is somebody that goes out to customers, like I know the plumber has come to my house, and neither one of us have taken temperatures or done a screening. His employer is responsible to screen that, the plumber. And they have a record that he came to my house and he was wearing a face mask and I gave him Purell. So I was wearing a face mask.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to apply it to your business, and you don't go crazy.
Right.
You
A little common sense goes a long way too, right?
Yeah, but yes, you should you should go and complete the safety plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be 90 pages long. It can be 3. Just what are you going to do in the event these things happen, so that you have it.
Okay. The next one is, are residential landlords responsible for COVID protection? Barbara would like to know.
Residential what?
Landlords.
None of the landlord tenant business came up.
Okay.
Now, so residential, like an apartment building?
I would assume so.
Okay. If it's an apartment building with communal, communal areas, elevators, those kind, you have responsibility. One person on an elevator, social distancing, Purell stations at entrances and exits. If you have somebody coming on site to do work, that's a visit, like the landlord hires this plumber, that plumber would have to be screened. But people who live there, no.
Okay. There's a question here about non-for-profits. Lori would like to know if there's any guidance specific to the nonprofit sector, any guidelines, and a nonprofit providing childcare doesn't really fall under any of the current categories. Is there greater guidance for nonprofits? I know we've talked a lot about manufacturers and retails.
No. Let me. Can you see my screen?
No, just we can see the PowerPoint still.
Darn it. Okay, well, I'm looking up childcare, nonprofit or not, is open in phase 1. However, I'm looking it up now. There are some restrictions and have to be followed. 16. I'm using the lookup that's on the forward site. I'm sorry you can't see, I can't see this. So it says here that industry childcare, child daycare services located in Orange County, currently permitted to operate statewide. In order you must comply with all the safety guidelines for your industry, as well as additional health and safety guidelines issued by the state, which is the safety plan. They have to abide by the safety plan.
Okay. So there is a feature on New York Forward where you can just type in childcare or nonprofit, and it should have some guidance there.
It tells you whether or not your business is open or not. If your business has restrictions, and that's, if I could share the screen, I could show you. And you have to type in, you can't type in childcare, you have to type in the NAICS code for it. And so you have to look that up first, but, whether it's nonprofit or not, it makes no difference because the virus is an equal opportunity, provider. So it doesn't matter if you're for profit or nonprofit.
Right. Okay.
What matters is the kind of business you have and whether or not your business has close contact with the public or employees.
Okay. Are these, another question that's come in, are these documents and practices supplemental to those already in place of food safety practices in food production facilities?
They're additional.
Additional, okay.
They may overlap. They may overlap, but if you're not doing temperature screening now of everybody that comes in, and some of the sanitation practices in food production places, already pretty strict. You're already doing good sanitation. The thing that may be different is how far apart are you keeping people? Do they need to work close together either because of the production line or safety? You need two people to do something and they have to be very close together. So you have to, there's certain things you're going to have to do extra, but the food industry has pretty good hygiene guidelines that they follow that would probably be just fine. It's the other stuff. Who's coming into the facility? Are you making sure your employees are far enough apart? Are you keeping them safe? Are they wearing safe face masks? That kind of thing.
I see. Okay. There's a question from Nicola who works in the library and was wondering if they will be required to screen patrons once the library is open and they're allowed in the building.
That is in a subsequent phase.
Okay.
They're not open now. That's in a subsequent phase. So I can't answer that.
Right. So the fact of the matter is that if it's not an open, if it's not phase one at this point, we're expecting that, whatever phase it's going to be in, that just before that phase reopens, then we'll get the guidance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. However, you will probably be doing a lot of the same stuff.
Right. That makes sense.
So, if you're a phase 2 or 3 business, it wouldn't hurt to check it out now and prepare because, unless you've already been open and doing 75% of this stuff already, this is a lot. This is a lot on a business. And it's even harder on smaller companies, I think.
Right. And it's true. I think that's really great advice, Petra, is to just, keep an eye on all of these regulations, regardless of the phase that your business is in, because a lot of this will likely be, dragged and dropped to the next phase, and it'll be little tweaks for each kind of business. But by and large, it seems like, the PPE, social distancing, sanitation stations will likely be applicable to almost every kind of business.
I think they're holding off on phase 2 guidance until they see what happens in phase 1.
Yeah,
and it'll be at least 2 weeks, no problems in the metrics, the 7 metrics that they don't go up in the Mid-Hudson region. And if they do, then things will be different for phase 2. So
we have a question about liability. Will employers be liable for death or sickness of an employee should they get COVID from someone who came into or works for the same company? Has there been any guidance on that?
I'm not an attorney, so I can't answer that.
Okay.
I can't answer that, but having a good COVID mitigation plan is in your favor. In an event like that, you've done all you could.
Mm-hmm.
You've done the training, you've provided the face masks, you've got sanitizer, you disinfect, you've done the screening, you've done everything to mitigate for that. So, I'm not an attorney, I can't.
Right. Well, I know we have had attorneys on prior webinars, and we'll likely have another one with an attorney on it. But they have said that there are some businesses who have asked people to sign waivers or hold harmless things, and every attorney said that they're not going to help.
No, that doesn't. No,
right.
that doesn't help. You
Yeah.
can't. I mean, if you put your employee in gross negligent harm, in harm's way, that like anything. This is like an OSHA requirement on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't follow OSHA guidelines and something happens, to an employee, you're liable.
Right.
If you're grossly negligent in that. But I don't know. I can't answer that.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on that kind of question too, because we were interested in that as well. So I'm sure that we'll address that in a coming webinar. We have one more question, and I think it's a good one. Roberto asks if you believe that as employers, our teams will feel capable of working while they're also taking these procedures as a priority. Do you think that it's a reasonable thing to expect, and do you think that people will feel comfortable and capable keeping all of these processes in mind, but also doing their jobs?
I have to say it's how it's communicated.
Okay.
And employers, this isn't a choice. And this is to make a balance between 100,000 deaths and, I don't know what it is now, 20 million people unemployed. So this is a fine balance that we have to walk. Most employees, when given clear direction and purpose and information, comply. And they do it for the safety of themselves and the company. In some facilities where I've assisted, employees, fought back about the masks. I'm not wearing a mask. And it's not about you. It's about me. And, you don't want to wear a mask. Would you push an old lady down the stairs? Because if you don't wear a mask, that's what you could do. And you don't even know that you're doing it. So employees, when they're given the purpose and information, they usually comply. And it helps if you have middle management that also is really on board with this. It's not a choice. As an employer, you can mandate these things, and you're required by law to implement them. So and most employees, I have to say, most employees comply. And the face mask, for example, is a huge sign of respect. I care about you. I'm wearing this face mask, even though it's hot and it's steaming up my glasses, and you can't even see my new lipstick. I'm wearing this mask for you. So fortunately, some of the businesses I've been working with, we've been doing this for months because they're essential businesses. And employees took it in stride. Now 50% have to go home. Now 25% have to go home. Work 25% more have to go home and work from home. Oh, we got to move the production, separate everything, take the chairs out of the break room, no more pizza.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is an employer can remind employees that what you do here keeps you safe here, but if you do it in home, in the community, it will also keep you safe. So, it's...
I think that's perfect, Petra. I mean, that's I think the best way I've heard it put, you know, I mean, it's all about, it's not just about personal responsibility, but it's also about doing it for, you know, your fellow coworkers. And I love, I mean, I don't love this, but I like your analogy of pushing someone down the stairs. Not that I'm condoning pushing anyone down the
No,
stairs.
I mean,
But it's
I,
a nice analogy for what it is that that you've communicated here
you
today.
know, I'm not going to wear a mask. Okay. All right. Well, would you hurt somebody?
Mhm.
Would you go and, you know, hurt somebody? Well, that's what you're doing. And if you, I can take you to the hospital. You see firsthand.
It's true. Very true. Well, Peter, thank you so much. I think that has been wildly informational and informative. Again, we'll have it on our website. Thank you so much. And I thank all of our attendees so much for joining us today. Again, I know it's a lot of information. We'll have it all on our website. I'd also like to remind everyone who's attending that we'll have another one next week, June 4th at 10. This session will be focused on what the banks want you to know about your PPP loans and the forgiveness. I mentioned at the top of the webinar that Mike Kordesky would be joining us. Unfortunately, schedule's changed and his has changed. So we will have another representative, but we will certainly have a bank rep who will talk to us all about that. And then the following week, we'll talk about what we've learned from this phase 1 opening. You know, are we really back in business and what actions do we need to take? I think that will be also very interesting to figure out, you know, to see in hindsight what happened in phase 1 and how that's going to influence phase 2. So we'll be sending registration information out by email. You can check our website, ocnyida.com. We'll be sending out some follow-ups on this conference. But that being said, I want to thank you, Petra, again for your time. That was wonderful. And thank everybody for joining us. And hopefully we will see you virtually all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Be
Bye-bye.
safe.
Yes, be safe.